Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for joining us on another fantastic edition at the IP Business Capital. Um, the topic we're going to be discussing today is the Nigerian Electricity Act and the impact that it has on renewable energy. Right? With me here are my fantastic speakers and guests. I'm too sure that the conversation is going to be amazing, right? Because we have two power brokers in our midst that are going to be talking to us about energy space, tax, investment, licensing, renewable energy, and other interesting topics, right? So let me just proceed to introduce our speakers and then we'll get right into the conversation. Our first speaker for today is Sandra Osinachi Nwandem. I don't know if I pronounced that right. She's a legal
You
professional.
tried.
She's a legal professional with the law firm of Tope Adebayo LP, Lagos, Nigeria. She's a certified energy law expert with an in-depth knowledge acting for and advising clients on legal issues about energy and environmental law policies and regulatory compliance. Sandra has significant experience advising multinational oil and gas companies on their roles and responsibilities to host communities in line with relevant petroleum legislation. She's a regular contributor to energy and environmental law platforms, a publication on legal issues affecting the petroleum industry in Nigeria, to offer practical guidance to players in the industry. Right, recently was presented with an award of honor by the Society of Petroleum Engineers. Fantastic. Sandra holds a master degree from the River State University, Port Harcourt. She holds a certificate in gas market design, structure, and regulation from the Florence School of Regulation at the European University Institute, Italy. She's a member of the Nigerian Bar Association, the NBS SBL as well, and the Society of Petroleum Engineers and the Association of Environmental Engineers of Nigeria. She's an avid reader and she sits on the board of trustees of the Quest Corners Book Club, a premier book club in Nigeria. Fantastic. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome our fantastic guest today, Mrs. Sandra Osinachi Wandem. Thank you so much for joining us. Our
Welcome.
second speaker is Folaboke Akin Adewale. Folaboke is a dynamic professional with a remarkable blend of legal expertise, business analyst skills, and technological insight. She's currently an assistant manager at the Niger Delta Power Holding Company of Nigeria and the lead curator at the Optimistic Future Labs, an internet publishing company that focuses on emerging technologies. She has been instrumental in driving operational efficiency, process improvement, implementing digital solutions, and stakeholder engagement in a dynamic and challenging environment. Our expertise spans across strategy analysis, project coordination, system implementation, resulting in tangible improvements in operational efficiency. She has built strong collaborative relationships to ensure seamless coordination and achieve mutually beneficial outcomes. She has been actively involved in the processes for the construction of various electricity projects, including distribution, substation installations, as well as transmission lines and substations. She's passionate about the energy space, the international energy space, and she's committed to leveraging her expertise in business analysis to drive innovation, operational effectiveness, and to navigate the complexities of the evolving energy landscape. Fantastic. Thank you so much for joining us today. We're going
Thank
to
you.
have a very robust conversation. I'm so glad to
Thank
have
you.
these amazing two speakers here right now. So we're going right into the conversation, right? And so let me start with Sandra, right? Recently the new Electricity Act was being passed, and I'm pretty sure that the reason why the act was being passed is because there was a need for renovation. There was a need for new reforms. I mean, everybody is talking about renewable energy and climate change, and it's one of the biggest things happening, right? So, could
Yeah.
you tell us the specific provisions that addresses these major innovations of the act, right? What are the major
Okay.
reforms? What are the major highlights of the new Electricity Act? Over to you.
Okay. Do you mind if I share my slides? I've
Oh,
put my okay. So
Sharing of slides. Oh. It was supposed
I
to be
didn't
more like a
ask.
conversation. It
Yes,
was supposed to be more like a conversation.
I'll still
Uh,
just speak to it.
Let me
Okay, no
see because
problem.
I haven't. No, the thing is, I haven't shared slides on this platform before, right? So
Okay.
I really don't know what the settings would be like. But let me check it. Let me
Well, let me
check
see
it.
if I can share directly from my own screen.
Yes,
Just let
try
me
it. I think.
just let okay, just let me know if you can see it, okay? So I'm going to
Okay,
share
that's
my
fine.
screen. Mm, okay. So can you see my screen?
No.
It's popping up.
Okay.
Okay, I'm coming.
Can you see it?
Okay.
I can see it.
Yes.
Yes, I
Yes.
can
We
You
see
see
it.
can see
now.
my screen, right?
Yes, we can see
Yes.
it.
Okay, please, can you read the first? Let me just be sure we're on the same page. Can you just read the
Okay.
first?
So it
Okay,
says major highlight of the Nigerian Electricity Act 2023
okay,
and impact on renewable energy.
okay. So we're together. So, can you just come again with your question, Lola, if you don't mind?
Okay, so the question is what are the major reforms
Okay.
of the new Electricity Act 2020? What are the major reforms? What are the major innovations of the act?
Okay. So the new Electricity Act 2003 was actually an act passed, a bill passed into law in June by the new regime, the new administration, and it basically repeals the Electric Power Section Reform Act of 2005 that has been existing for some years. So this act was actually passed following a constitutional amendment. I just have to give a background before we jump into discussing the act. So, before now, actually, the power to generate, transmit, and distribute energy was actually contained in the exclusive legislative list and the concurrent legislative lists. But with the new, so both states and the federal government could actually legislate on power generation, power distribution, and all that. But with the new constitutional amendments, you can see that under Section 14 of the second schedule of the 1999 Constitution, electricity states could make laws only for the generation and transmission and distribution of electricity to areas not covered by the national grid system within that state. So what this constitutional amendment just did was to cancel, you can see here, I cancelled the statement to areas not covered by a national grid system within that state. So right now, the state can actually make laws and actually create regulators to deal with or to decide on issues concerning power generation, transmission, and distribution of electricity to all areas within the state, whether they are covered by the national grid system or not. So before now, the areas covered by the national grid system could only be regulated by the Nigeria Electricity Regulatory Commission, that's NEC. So this actually gave it was a backing to the passing of the new law of the Electricity Act 2003. So now, what are the objectives of this act? Specifically to provide comprehensive legal and institutional framework to guide the operation of a privatized contract and rule-based competitive electricity market, and also to stimulate um, regulatory measures to generally scale up efficient power generation, transmission, distribution, and all that. It's actually also to open the value chain of Nigeria electricity supply industry. So, having said that, we'll now dive into the the reforms in the act. Now, the major reforms in the act is the provision of Section 2.2. The major provision of the act is actually the fact that the power to generate, transmit, and distribute energy has now been decentralized. So states now have the power to generate, transmit their own energy, and also to come up with regulatory bodies within their states. this provision is just within their state. But when it has to do with interstate power generation, interstate distribution, the NEC still has the power to do that. Now, under Section 2 of the Electricity Act, Section 2, Sub 2, we see here that the act actually recognizes the supremacy of state laws. So this means that all states that have been able to create their own laws concerning power generation or the electricity sector in that state will no longer be regulated by NEC. So NEC no longer has powers in a state that has its own electricity law. So right now, I know that some states have their laws, not all states, very few states. I think Lagos State, Ondo State just came up with their own law, Edo State and Kaduna State. So this will actually make other states sit up to create their own laws. This is expanding the electricity value chain and bringing more players into the sector, because states will now be issuing licenses to electricity generators and distributors, and also to the suppliers. So we see that the supremacy of the state to make their own legislations, and then the state can also collaborate with the local governments to promote investments in electricity in areas that are off grid. Those local governments where the national grid can actually not get to, the states can now also create laws and give licenses to either the grid or mini grid operators to operate in those areas. So that's a very important reform. So we'll look at another reform that the Electricity Act has brought. So we see here that the Electricity Act, by virtue of Section 63, Sub 2B, also provides that any person can own and operate a mini grid within a state under a law enacted by a state, and it doesn't need the permits. It doesn't need the permit of NEC. It only needs the state permit, unless that his operation is going to go beyond the state. If it's an interstate operation, or if it's a cross-boundary operation, for example, country to country, NEC still has the power to regulate that. Then we also see that this is actually a very important legislation, or a very important provision, because before now, under the mini grid regulation of 2016 issued by NEC, the mini grid operator only had to conduct his activities subject to the expansion plan of the disco. Now we know that Nigeria is operated by 11 discos. So the discos had power to generally operate, transmit, supply, do everything that has to do with power generation within regions. Now the 11 discos operated within certain regions of the country. And mini grid operators, before they could generate or transmit their own power, they needed to enter an agreement with the discos. And sometimes these discos were not open to actually enter these agreements with mini grid operators. So that made power generation very difficult for mini grid operators. And that also kind of reduced access to electricity. In fact, that's one of the problems we have of lack of access to electricity. Because if these discos don't get to the places that are not covered by the grid, what happens to those people? It's actually the mini grid operators that are supposed to go to those areas, having obtained maybe a permit or something from the state to cover power generation in those areas. But where the disco covers everything, there's nothing we can do. But this law, by Section 63, now provides that mini grid operators can actually undergo power generation and independent electricity distribution within a state, provided they have, a permit from the state. So we also look at another provision. Now we see that under Section 63 also, we see that a person may also construct, own, and operate and undertake generation of electricity not exceeding 1 megawatt, or distribution of electricity not exceeding 100 kilowatts, and or such other capacity as the commission may determine, without a license. Now, before now, every power generator, every distributor needed a license to operate. In fact, he needed a license under the ESPRA, under the old law, the 2005 law. They also needed a license. They also didn't need a license to operate, for power generation not exceeding 1 megawatt. But that will only apply if the power was not going to be sold out, if it was going to be used for personal use. So now what this new law does is that you don't need a license to operate when you're generating power that does not exceed 1 megawatt, or also when you're trying to distribute power that does not exceed 100 kilowatts. But you can also commercialize that power. There is no longer will I say, that exception that, except you want to use that power for your own personal use. Even though you're commercializing it, you don't need a license. So that will actually attract new players into the value chain, knowing that they don't need a license to actually generate and distribute power that is this, that is 1 megawatt or 100 kilowatts. So we see another transitional provision of the Electricity Act. It's contained under Section 230. Now, I've said it before, states can make laws to establish electricity markets and electricity regulatory authority. So now they don't have to depend on NEC. Every state is going to take their power generation destiny into their own hands. So states, that will kind of create competition between states, to make states sit up in their electricity power generation industry. And then also discos are empowered to create additional successor distribution companies. Now, I said before that discos normally operate within certain regions. Now, with this new act or with these new provisions, these discos will now have to create successor companies, because the law is envisaging a situation where discos operate across a state. What happens and regulators? Does the disco still fall under the regulation of NEC, or would the disco be subject to the state regulator? So now this law is saying create their own. So these successor companies are going to be like who are going to carry out all the duties of the state, and then NEC is going to provide that disco company with the responsibility of transferring their assets to to the successor discos, their assets and their liabilities, and these success incorporated under KAMA. Now, what happens is that resolved of further regulatory oversight of these successor disco companies. Now, these successor disco companies are going to be regulated by the state which they operate. So they're going to operate transmission, system operation, and everything is going to be regulated by the state regulations. Now, remember, I said NEC will only when the states fail to come up with their own regulations or their laws. Now, what is next? You can see my arrow is moving up. Now, what now happens is that there will be an establishment of an intergovernmental body to foster cordial relationship between NEC and the state regulators. Now, the law is kind of envisaging a situation where there will be conflicts. NEC regulators, state regulators, they don't want a situation where there will be conflicts of their regulation to forestall that kind of conflict, because there will not be parallel regulators together in a situation up with their laws and their regulations. So there will be an intergovernmental body to foster a cordial relationship. Now, there will be an interinstitutional relationship between NEC and the state regulatory authorities. So they have to be in tandem with their laws and with their regulations. So next we see the next reform is the disaggregation of distribution licenses. Now, under the old law, under the EPSRA, distribution licenses and supply together. So a distribution license holder also had to do the job of the supply, that's trading of electricity and all that. But now the new law says there will be two separate licenses. NEC will be issuing separate licenses for distribution of electricity and separate licenses for supply of electricity. And there will also be supply companies as well. Intermediate companies will be created for that supply, just like intermediate companies will be created for distribution of power as well. So this means more players can come into the industry to apply for these supply licenses. So the job is now separated. We know that distribution of electricity has to do with the maintenance of the infrastructure and all that, while supply has to do with trading, market structure and all that. So this job will be separated. So we think it's a very welcome development, because it will introduce more players and it will introduce competition as well. So the next very important provision of the Act is in Section 68, Sub 4 and 5, which is the recognition of distribution and supply franchising agreements. Now, NEC will insist on giving distribution licenses to the holders of the licenses. But right now, will NEC has been empowered to recognize the franchising agreement between the discos and third parties. Now, we said that there will be successor third parties. Right now, these successor companies are third parties. They do not have to be regulated by of the license, the terms placed on those licenses by NEC. They can NEC will allow these distribution companies and the successor companies NEC will recognize the franchising agreements. In those agreements, the models, the tariffs, and all that, the terms of that agreement will be recognized. It doesn't have to be the terms of the license. So franchising agreements will now be recognized under the new law. Then there will also be an introduction of a multiple generation licenses. Now, for example, what does this mean for independent power producers or power purchasers? What does this mean? Introduction of multiple licenses mean there will be two licenses for an operator who generates power, who generates electricity, maybe from gas to power, because there are different ways of generating electricity, either from renewable sources or from gas to power. So the one that has been most popular is gas to power. The one that is most popular right now is gas to power. So one company can actually operate a gas to power generation distribution license while still operating a renewable energy distribution license. So one company can have two licenses to operate electricity generation from gas to power and also electricity generation from renewable sources. So it can have multiple licenses. That was not operational under the old law. So that is also a very good provision for investors. Then we have another provision, important provision. We see that under Section 15 of the Act, where the transmission company of Nigeria is to incorporate the independent supply operator, the independent systems operator. Sorry about that. So the transmission company of Nigeria used to carry out both the duty of transmission and also the duty of independent system operations. So now the new law has made it compulsory for the TCN to incorporate another company that will bear the burden of system operations. So before, we see the TCN was overburdened. That's why you hear issues of national grid collapse and all that, because TCN is both involved with maintaining this infrastructure, maintaining the grid, and doing all that, and also trading electricity or trading power. So now that role is going to be separated. We're going to have an ISO, which is going to be a company under KAMA, and we're also going to have the TCN. So the TCN roles will now be separated. So the TCN will have an independent license, while the ISO will have an independent license. Are you with me? Can everybody hear me?
Absolutely. I mean, this is so detailed. It's obviously a
Okay.
master class already. So
Okay,
could you
thank you.
just please round up in about 5 minutes because our time is fast spent and there are other questions,
Okay.
but it appears to be that you have actually answered other questions with this presentation. But we'll get there.
Oh,
Yes,
we
yes.
will get there. We will still touch everything. We'll still touch everything. Okay, I'm almost done. If I'm not done. Well, those are the major reforms. There are very many reforms, but if I'm to put everything into the slides, I mean, even 2, 3 hours not be enough to talk about all of them. But these are the major reforms that we applaud because it actually is in line with the objectives of the act, the objectives of opening up the Nigeria electricity supply, industry, introducing more players and reducing the cumbersome nature of procuring licenses. So not everybody now needs licenses. If you're not going to generate as much as 1 megawatt, or if you're not going to distribute as much as 100 kilowatts, you don't actually need a license to operate on the grid. And many operators have said that it's going to cut their the cost of having access to the grid. So I think the demonopolization and decentralization of the power sector are very welcome developments. They are very welcome developments because we give every state the power to generate its own power, to have its own energy system, its own operational system, and its own regulations as well, so that everybody doesn't have to depend on the federal government and on neck for that for such things. So thank you very much, Lola D.
Amazing, fantastic. I mean, literally, you just covered everything, and I love the way you explained it. It was so easy to understand for some of us who are really foreign to the sector. Right, it was easy for us to understand some of those terms, right? And I think
Yes,
one key thing that is evident from the act is the fact that there's now a decentralization, right? State
yes,
governments can
yes,
now make laws, they can issue licenses, and not
yes,
everybody needs a license to operate in the market. I love the fact that
yes,
you mentioned that those who are creating power, right, both from renewable sources
yes,
and from oil and gas as well, there's that
yes.
opportunity to operate in the market without the license. So
Double
that brings me
license.
to my next question. And that question is
Okay.
still for you, Sandra, right?
All
What are the
right.
major impacts in the renewable space? What's the impact of this act in renewable energy, right?
Okay. Okay.
Yes. So, how can renewable energy firms take advantage of this new act? So
Okay. Okay. So we have more changes to the Act, and we'll be moving further. Actually, I've highlighted some specific provisions of the Act that actually guide renewable energy production and utilization. Now, remember that that is one of the primary objectives of the Act, to actually utilize renewable energy, because we know that access to energy in Nigeria is nothing to write home about. Now, players in the industry, maybe for Labo, can actually concur with what I'm going to say. I hear that Nigeria needs 45, is it 45 gigawatts of 45 gigawatts of power, and we only are operating right now on just 8 gigawatts, and we actually have 8,000 gigawatts, and we actually have just access to 3,500 gigawatts. So this act coming at this time, recognizing the important role that renewable energy will play in energy access, is very important, because obviously power generated from gas is not sufficient to meet the energy access needs. So we see some of the implementations, or some not implementations anyway, some of the provisions of the act that deal with renewable energy. Now, first of all, I think this is under section 3 of the act. Section 3 actually makes provision that the federal government will have an integrated electricity policy and strategic implementation plan. Now, I have a problem with this actually, because the law saying that there will be a policy, I was thinking that there will be the policy before the law was enacted, because policies are actually the backbone or the base for which laws are enacted. So for the act to now say that there will still be an integrated electricity policy and strategic implementation plan, it means this is futuristic. But however, there is actually hope, knowing that there is a policy that will be guiding this renewable energy movement. So now, what would the policy contain? Policies to be made within 1 year of the commencement of the act, and the policy will be based on the optimal utilization of resources such as gas, coal, and every renewable energy source. So we're going to be utilizing hydro, we're going to be utilizing solar, we're going to be utilizing biomass, maybe waste to power, when this policy actually comes on board. And then the policy also plans to contain specific policies which will contain waivers, maybe tax waivers or tax subsidies, that will stimulate the development of renewable energy. So like I said, that's contained under section 3 of the act. Then the act also contains the powers, also provides that the minister of power will have powers to make recommendations for the promotion of utilization of both conventional and renewable energy sources for power generation. So the Minister of Power is going to continuously, as this act, operates, make recommendations for utilization. Could be recommendations such as exemption from customs levies and duties, custom levies and other duties on equipment and machinery necessary for utilization of renewable energy. It could be financial incentives. It could be maybe financial incentives from funds. Funds will be created for those in the renewable energy space. Then there will be data maintenance. There will be dissemination of renewable energy technologies, because know that technology is also a problem in generating renewable energy. Then there will also be the use of biomass for electricity generation. So the Minister of Power is going to make recommendations as regards the utilization of these other sources of renewable energy. So that will also mean a lot for those in the renewable energy space. They will be able to take advantage of this. But like I said, this is going to be a policy that will come up, because the act says the minister will. It hasn't happened yet, so it's a futuristic thing, but we are hopeful that all this will be implemented. Then there are also other incentives for renewable and to promote renewable energy under the act. Now, these are actually provided under the act. It's not futuristic. This provision under Section 18. Now, Section 18 now says that NEC, that's the Nigeria Electricity Regulatory Commission, and the independent system operator is obliged to promote power generation through renewable energy. I believe that there will be regulations to actually detail how NEC and ISO will go about this. But for now, we just have the obligation in the Act. And the this provision also obliges NEC, or it also means that NEC, in granting licenses, generation or distribution licenses or supply licenses, will have to make sure that renewable energy source, generation of electricity from renewable energy sources are embedded in the licenses. So when applicants actually apply for these licenses, I'm sure that there will be regulations asking these applicants to endeavor that they meet some targets, ensuring that they embed generation of electricity from renewable sources, not just from gas to power source. Then we also have Section 166 of the Act. It provides that the Federal Ministry responsible for finance will introduce such tax incentives. So this one is also futuristic. Will introduce such tax incentives as are necessary to promote and facilitate the generation, consumption of energy from renewable sources, to foster such tax reliefs that will incentivize the implementation of renewable energy projects in Nigeria. Okay. So we also have more. Yes. So Section 164 also provides that there will be simplified licensing and fees regime. Now, I had earlier mentioned that getting these licenses used to be quite difficult. It used to be a cumbersome process. So now the act envisages that there will be a simplified licensing regime. I believe that there will be regulations to treat how that will come about, but there's just this provision which is very this is a very welcome initiative, that there will be simplified licensing and fees regime, and that these owners of or generators of power through renewable energy, we have easy connectivity to the grid. So before it was a problem, now they're going to have easy connectivity to the grid. As we go further, you see another provision that says that the discos will not unnecessarily or unreasonably withhold access to connectivity to the grid. So before now, I believe that the discos used to unnecessary, unreasonably withhold access to the grid. So now there will be no, unnecessary withholding of consent for power generators through renewable energy sources to have access to the grid. Now they can also have power purchase agreements to contain terms for marketing and trading renewable energy. Then the ISO now has the obligation to integrate renewable energy into the national grid and distribution network. There will also be favorable price mechanisms for renewable energy providers. There will also be feed-in tariffs. Now, what are feed-in tariffs? Feed-in tariffs are the costs of actually trading renewable energy. Before, it was not cost reflective. So now, by the provisions of this act, it's going to be cost reflective, because the providers of renewable energy actually complain that they spend a lot of money importing the equipment that they use in, providing this source of energy. So sometimes they don't get to sell it, or they don't get to supply this power at the same price or in a cost reflective way. They don't get their return on investment. So now the NEC is going to be mandated to ensure that the cost of power from renewable energy is going to be cost reflective. So they're going to have feed-in tariffs for 20 years to guarantee that the renewable energy power generators will have their return on investments. And there will also be easy measures for award of renewable electricity concessions for generation and distribution of electricity within 10 megawatts. So that's a very welcome development for renewable energy power generators. Now,
Okay,
on
so
the other provision,
let's bring it
okay,
home now. Okay, so let's bring it
okay,
home. Right. I have one
okay,
question. The question is, all of
okay.
these seems like these are amazing provisions, right, to
Yes,
position Nigeria as a suitable spot for investment in renewable energy, right? So let's
yes,
bring it up, right? Firms that are doing things in sustainability, renewable energy, organizations that are startups, I mean, right, that they are
yes,
generating power through the use of solar lamps, all these
yes.
examples of different kinds of renewable energy concepts,
Energy.
especially among startups. What exactly can they take advantage of in this provision? So apart from the fact that there's regulatory compliance, which we're getting to that actually, right, in terms of the
Yes,
regulations that govern, startups, especially in renewable space. Apart from the regulatory
yes,
compliance and all of that, what exactly has this act done for them? So I'm speaking in categorically now in terms of startups. What exactly has
yes.
this act done? How is this act going to position them for growth in the
Okay,
industry?
okay. There's actually a provision for off-grid operators.
Okay,
Now, most renewable energy providers are actually off-grid operators, because they
exactly.
go on-grid if you are a renewable energy provider. So now, off-grid operators are recognized, and these off-grid operators, I believe they will be startups, because they are not going to be generating so much energy. So now we see that they don't even need licenses, because they're going to be generating less than, say, 1 megawatt of energy, of electricity. They don't need licenses. So before, like I said, if they were going to commercialize that power being generated, they needed permits, or they needed to enter an agreement with the discos, because the
Okay.
discos would give them a hard time doing commercializing energy, whether 1 megawatt or below 1 megawatt. But this time around, the fact that the act has made it possible for operators in the mini grids and in the off grid regions, mostly the rural areas, or all that, means that they don't have to go through the stress of trying to get a license. So every startup, or every small, solar panel operator can actually come into the market, commercialize its power, and there's also the provision for feed-in tariffs, so they can actually charge for what it costs them to actually come or generate that power. So the fact that they don't need licenses, they don't need to go through the bureaucratic process of getting
Sorry, come
licenses.
again, please, Sandra. You said they can take advantage of some tariffs such that they can
Yes,
charge the amount
feed-in tariffs. Yes,
feeding.
feed-in tariffs.
Okay.
Yes, so the act makes provision for feed-in tariffs. Feed-in tariffs means that the amount they charge for supplying this renewable energy is going to reflect the cost in which they reflect the cost that they use in generating the energy. Now, these startups, like you said, they usually complain that it costs them money to get their equipment. They usually import these equipments. So most of the time, it's difficult for them to sell at the same amount that they use in producing it. So it was not really attractive to investors. But now these small companies or startup companies can actually now have cost reflective, tariffs. They can charge even discos who want to buy from them, or even, just the people, their end users. They can charge as much as what they use in generating, or the amount they use in generating that energy. And the fact that they don't need licenses to operate is just a very welcome development. they can operate off grid. They don't need the consent of the discos to actually operate. Now you see that if we have somebody who is generating renewable energy in an estate, he can actually provide light for his estate for commercial use, not just for his personal use. Can provide light for his estate without a license, and that's very encouraging because he can get, or an operator can now get return on his investment. I hope that answers your question. Hello.
Okay, so I was muted. So I said
Okay.
absolutely, absolutely. Sometimes startups are always creating something new. There's always this innovation here and there. So,
Yes.
getting to know the specific areas of the act, right? The specific area of the act, I mean, that
Yeah.
covers those segments. I know there are different kinds of energy firms. There are those who are producing serious energy. There are those in
Yeah.
the renewable space. But getting to hear how the act really helps these startups, right, is something
Yes.
that I feel like I've really learned to write from this entire presentation. Presentation is so detailed. I mean,
Thank
you've
you.
also spoken about the incentives, right? You've
Yeah.
spoken about the
Yes.
whole. So let's move to Folabo, right? Um,
Okay.
let's move to Folabo.
Okay. All right. Okay.
You are muted, Olalade.
You're muted, Lola.
You are muted.
Oh, sorry. So let's talk about the major key stakeholders in the energy sector, right? I mean, the energy sector is quite, the value chain is quite wide. Um, and that's the reason why we're having this conversation, right? So, who are the key stakeholders? How is the value moving across the chain? You know, yes, please give us some insights for Labo.
All right, can you guys hear me?
Yes, we can.
All right. Sandra, wonderful presentation. I feel underprepared now because of your presentation. All right, so first, the most
Thank
important
you.
stakeholder, the most important stakeholder in the energy space are the customers, right? Nigerians. We are the ones that are paying for the power. It's our money that makes the value chain run, right? So now let's start from the top of the value chain. Gas providers. More than 85% of Nigeria's electricity is generated from gas, right? Gas fuel the generation of electricity, like majority of what we generate in Nigeria. So gas providers are on top of the value chain. They are like the first on the value chain, right? Then gas transporters, because you need to transport your gas from the gas power plant. You need to transport it through pipelines, right? To the Gencos. So now when we say Gencos, what does it mean? Gencos means generation companies, right? These are the people that generate the electricity that we use, right? So we have the providers, gas transporters, then the generation companies, the Gencos. Generation companies generate the electricity and send it to the grid. So now the grid is managed, right? Operated and managed by the Transmission Company of Nigeria. They are the ones in charge of transporting the electricity that the generation company generates, transporting it to the discos, right? So the discos are the Eco discos, Port Harcourt discos, the ones that the customers interact with. The discos then step down the electricity that has been transported and sell to us, right? So now I just explained the infrastructural value chain of the electricity sector. Now let me explain the commercial value chain of the electricity sector, right? So gas providers, gas transporters, Gencos, right? TCN, right? So this energy that has been generated by the generation companies is not sold directly to the discos, right? So we have what you call the Nigerian Bulk Electricity Trading Company, that's MBET, right? So MBET buys this electricity in bulk from the generation companies and sell to the discos, right? And the reason we have MBET as like a middleman between the generation companies and the discos is because our electricity market is still growing. We are still in the transition phase of the electricity market. We are not matured enough to have a willing buyer, willing seller market. Because in matured electricity market, right, the generation companies sell their power directly to the discos. But that's not the case here. The reason that MBET was established was because of what you call the, well, let me not go into too technical, but what, because of the losses, right? Infrastructural losses that occurs. So let's say, for example, generation companies generate 1 megawatt of electricity. By the time they transport that 1 megawatt of electricity and it gets to the distribution company and the distribution substation, the more megawatt of electricity, the megawatt of electricity that will be um, distributed to the customers might be more less than the 1 megawatt. Why? Because the distribution infrastructure is not functional enough to use all the electricity, right, that has been generated by the generation companies. So MBET is there to cover that shortfall, right? Because I, as a generation company, if I say I'm selling you 1 megawatt for 100 naira, it's not my business if you sell only 80 naira worth of electricity to your customers, right? I'm expecting 100 naira from you, right? So that's why there's MBET, because I'm selling 100 naira worth of electricity to MBET. If discos are not able to distribute that 100 megawatt, that 100 naira worth of electricity to their customers, right? MBET is paying that 20 naira difference, right? So that's why we still have MBET, right? Um, in the commercial space, like in the commercial space of the electricity sector. Then after MBET, obviously NEC, right? The Nigeria Electricity Regulatory Commission. NEC governs, like they regulate the entire power sector, right? And they are the ones that issue the licenses, generation licenses, transmission licenses, distribution licenses. But with this new act that, as Sandra so succinct, as she explained, like in detail, right? This new act will now have states coming in, right? So now, apart from NEC, we are going to have State Electricity Regulatory Commission. Like Ondo State already has one, I think. Then Lagos State has a very serious and matured electricity regulatory board. Kaduna State has, then Edo State also. So states, we're going to also see states coming in as stakeholders, right, in the electricity market. They are going to be creating their own laws, issuing their own licenses and all that. I hope you understand, right?
I mean, very clear perspective, right, of how the entire thing works, both from the industry perspective and also from the commercial side perspective. Fantastic. Thank you so much. So now we're going to be going to the next question. The question that was okay, so I the thing is Sandra already answered that question. The question was for Folabo, really. It was what opportunities, but I will still push it to Folabo, right? What opportunities actually exist for startups, right? Clean tech entrepreneurs and innovators driving change in climate change sectors based on this new act. We understand that there's an opportunity for them to operate in the market without having to obtain a license. I mean, I really got that. And so let's talk about the other opportunities: investment, tax tariffs, you know.
Okay. All right. So, the as Sandra explained, right, the new Electricity Act is very, very big on trying to create the renewable energy sector, right? They actually,
Yes.
the act wants the renewable energy space to
Energy,
grow,
yes, they
right?
do.
So, aside from the regulatory opportunities, let me talk about tax, right?
Okay.
So, solar renewable energy equipment, right, are exempt from VAT.
Okay.
Renewable energy equipment, yes, they are exempt from VAT, right? So we are talking of solar generators, we're talking of wind generators, we're talking of solar cells, right? Not solar panels. There's a difference between solar cells and solar panels. We're talking of
Okay.
solar cells, right? We're talking of parts to make wind turbines. We're talking of biomass. We're talking of hydro. They are all exempt from VAT. And this, you can go and check it out under the VAT modification order of 2021.
Okay.
It's there very clear. They're exempt from VAT. So that's the first um tax
Ta-
exemption, right? Yes. Though personally, I feel like it's not enough. I feel like solar panels should also qualify to be exempted from VAT, but stakeholders are still pushing. And I still feel like services under renewable energy, because it's not just the equipment, their services should also be exempt from VAT. But stakeholders are still like working with the Ministry of Finance. As Sandra mentioned, right, the act says that the Minister of Finance will um, initiate or make policies that will incentive. So maybe this is what we're going to see going forward, right? Which is hopeful, is a futuristic thing. But what we have right now is that solar cells, parts for wind, biomass, and all the rest are exempt from VAT, right? Then another thing we have is that solar cells are exempt from import duties. Solar cells are exempt from import duties. So now we have opportunities for startups, right, to import solar cells into the country and manufacture, assemble solar panels. Do you understand?
Again, solar cells are exempt from
Import duties.
import duties.
Yes.
Okay.
Solar cells are exempt from import duty. So we can have a small startup, right? You don't have to be big, right? Come in, import solar cells, have a small manufacturing assembly plant, right? And start to assemble solar panels, right? And if a startup is able to do that, they are also going to be qualified as a pioneer company, right? Under the
Wow.
industrial, yes, under the Industrial Development Act, Income Tax Act.
Okay. Wow.
Yes. So pioneer companies, right, are exempted from paying income tax for 3 years.
Yes, that's true.
Yes, for 3 years, and it can be renewed for another 2 years. The renewable energy sector qualifies under this exemption, so under these pioneer companies. Then there are also other opportunities for small startups, right? The
Yeah.
Act, as Sandra mentioned, right, obligates licensed generation companies. Licensed, so we have like the Geregus and the AFAM, right, to generate a certain percentage of their electricity from renewable energy. So two things can happen, right? Either these Gencos go and build their own renewable power sources, or they buy electricity, right? So you can have a smart startup go and set up a solar farm, right? A solar farm near a farm, and say, and come in and say, okay, we're going to sell power to you at a cheaper rate, right? Then you sell the same power, like I'm going to sell 10, okay, let's say 1 megawatt of electricity to you at 100 naira. Then you have a chance to sell this power to the grid at 110 naira. Those are deals that I think generation companies will jump on, at least pending the time they establish their own plants, right? That's if they want to establish their plant. Because I've noticed something in the commercial market. If a deal is good, people take it, right? So that is those are also opportunities. Then also there's the act also makes provision for the whole local content, skill acquisition. So a smart engineer can set up a local, like a school, right, to train solar panel engineers, right? It's you can be able to get funding from, I think, the local content. I'm not very sure, because I think that's a futuristic provision, right? The under
Yes.
It's there in the act. Local content is just local content, right? And skill acquisition is part of it. So you can go train people on how to maintain solar panels, how to fix wind, operation and maintenance
So
of
there's an
renewable.
opportunity for education, right?
Yes, yes, educating, like training technicians and the rest. So those are also opportunities. Um, they are basically like, okay, yes. And another thing I wanted to point out, right? For She mentioned it, mini grids, right? I'm not
Yeah.
going to go, because Sandra has touched a lot, like she has explained what mini grid is, what it's all about, right? So a smart solar or wind company, right, can go into a state like Zamfara, right, and say, okay, we have 75 million Nigerians that do not have access to electricity, and look at a village, right, and say, okay, this village, they are, it's a big town, right? They need electricity. Let's say if I set up my farm here, my solar farm here, I can be able to generate less than 1 megawatt of electricity and power this place, right? Now, one thing I've noticed in the for renewable energy people, like renewable energy companies, like that have done this in the past, because renewable energy companies have been doing this in the past, is that once they set up this farms and sorry, these plants and sell to like people, the poor or less privileged, more you get, they do not have a way to get their money back because these people cannot pay for the electricity that has been given to them.
Yes.
So under
That's
section 120, yeah. So under section 122 of the Act, we have the Power Consumers Assistance Fund, right? So this Power Consumers Assistance Fund is a fund that has been established to subsidize electricity for the underserved, for the less privileged, right? So we do not know the full modalities of how this fund will operate, but the law has provided for this fund to be in existence, right? So both the NEC and the Minister of Power will create the modalities going forward. But we have an opportunities where renewable energy companies can go in and say, oh, look at what we've done. We've spoken to the local government, we've spoken to the state government, we've gotten permission to establish, to provide electricity for these people. For every 1 kilowatt hour of electricity, it costs 2 naira, right? But our consumers can only pay 1 naira. We are applying to get the other 1 naira to be covered from this fund. That's
okay.
something that we are going to see.
How
You understand?
operational is the fund? Is this something that is already okay? The act is a new act, so it's yet
The
to
act
be
is a new act, so we need to wait for our Minister of Power to come
okay.
in, and
Okay,
because
make it
it's not, we do not have the an order yet. We do not have the framework of how it's going to work. But it's going to be
okay.
Minister of Power and NEC that have to come together and create a framework for how this fund will work. But the act has already made provision for it, made provision for how it will be funded, and to be funded because it will be funded because generation companies, distribution companies will have to pay a certain percentage of their income into the fund, so it will be
Yes, into the
funded. Yeah.
funds. Yes, it will be funded. Fantastic, fantastic. I feel like we might have to do a white paper that talks about, some of these important benefits for startups,
Yeah.
right? Startups in the renewable energy space, right? From the tax perspective, from the mini grid, the licensing, and so let's come back to licensing, right? I've been hearing a lot of phrases such as licensing, franchising. I know the model is kind of different in the energy space from the regular model because when we talk about franchising and licensing in IP, it's more like you're giving somebody the right to use, your intellectual property for a limited period of time, or you're licensing your business model out to another franchisee, to take advantage of that and to develop several models in different countries. But when it comes to energy, right, how does licensing and franchising, how does it play out? Let's start with Sandra, then we'll come to Folabo.
Okay, licensing and franchising. Okay, so under the Electricity Act,
Yeah.
even the old ESPRA, we had the distribution license, distribution and supply license. Like I said, they were together. Under the new act, they will be separated. We have the supply license, we have the transmission license, we have the generation license, and all that. Now, under the new act, it provides that there will be franchising of distribution licenses. Now, distribution licenses, because there's now power for states actually to make their own state laws and their regulations. So the discos will operate across certain regions and how will now have to franchise their license to third parties. Now these third parties are going to be like successor discos, smaller discos that will be operating within the states. They are not going to be regulated by NEC except for example, a state doesn't have its own law, they are now going to be regulated by the state regulator. Now, franchising means the terms of the franchise, as terms of third party agreement, which is the franchise, will be honored by NEC or by the state regulator. So whatever terms are reached, maybe model of tariff, terms of tariff, and cost of tariffs will have to be what was agreed in the franchise agreement. So I don't know what you mean by, you are the IP expert, so
We clarified
maybe.
it. I get the
Okay,
clarification. It's clear. But because
okay,
the way it is applied in the energy sector is not the same way it applies in the creative sector. Although
okay,
it's still the same term in terms of
okay,
franchising and licensing, right? But
okay.
from what you said, I hear you say that discos can license, right, to sub
Yes,
discos to
yes. No, it's
distribute
not be a
electricity.
license, to be a franchise agreement to
To be
successor
a franchise
discos.
agreement.
Agreement, yes. It's only
Fantastic.
the NEC or the state regulator that has the power to license. But where
Makes
the
sense.
main
Okay.
licensee, that's the DISCO or the GENCO or the supply licensee, now wants to divest some of his assets to a successor company, there'll be a franchise agreement. So it's not going to be a license anymore because DISCO doesn't have power to give license. So it's that franchise agreement that will now be honored, the terms of that franchise agreement. So the franchise agreement is going to be standing on its own from the license. So,
Okay, I get it
okay.
now.
So I
I
don't
get
know
it.
how does that help, in the IP space. Maybe we can also
So
learn from you.
the thing is the IP space. So when we say IP space, we are basically talking about the creative, sectors,
Okay.
film,
Okay.
television, Nollywood, and all of that, right? So the way it operates there is that if you have a particular intellectual property, for example, that you want to license to a third party, what we have is a licensing agreement, right? So
Okay.
you're giving a
Okay.
party the right to use that intellectual property. Maybe it's a brand, maybe it's a trademark name,
Okay.
right, to use the intellectual property for a period of
Okay.
time. Okay. So when
Okay.
it's music license, you can put your music on different streaming platforms. You're licensing it, right,
Okay.
over a period of
Okay.
time. You're able to earn. So it's more like a
Okay.
collaborative strategic partnership approach where
Oh,
you're giving out your
okay.
IP. In return for that, you're also getting royalties and getting money in
Yes.
that.
Yes.
So it's
Yes.
kind of different in meaning in the energy
It,
space. I get the fact
yes.
that licensing occurs with the states and then franchising occurs with discos and
Yes.
the
Successor
sub.
companies. Yes.
Fantastic.
Yes. It's just difference in nomenclature.
Exactly, exactly. So
Mm,
let's come to
yeah.
Collabo. Any final thoughts, on how licensing and franchising, operates in the energy space?
I think Sandra has basically like explained it properly. Like
Okay.
discos, because discos have a particular area that they are supposed to supply electricity, distribute electricity to, and you you can't just come into a disco's house like we usually say. You can't come into a strong man's house without
Yeah, but
without being the strong. You understand? So you can't come
yeah,
into this the space where a disco is supplying distributing electricity and just come and take their customers. You have to have a
exactly.
contract with them. So that's why they
Yeah.
say franchise. They are giving you a subset of their customers, right? To
Yes.
Okay.
distribute electricity to them. So it's just the same way you have um some estates, right? There are some. I know it happens in Lagos State where like some generation companies, like tiny IPPs, go and say, okay, there are 5 estates in this place. We guarantee you 22 hours of electricity. They had to have had a franchise from the discos. There's an
Yes.
agreement. Before they can do that, they
Yes.
must have had an agreement with the
Yes.
disco. So that's what you call franchising. Licensing obviously is NEC is giving you the permission to
Okay.
operate, the permission to
Yes.
generate, the permission to transmit, and the permission to distribute. So that's basically what it means.
Yes.
Interesting. Interesting. So beyond just the licensing and the franchise, so when it comes to NEC giving the permission to operate within, and all of that, are there regulatory requirements or it's just about getting the agreements? Are there regulatory requirements involved or it's just really
Okay,
anybody?
Oh, okay. So this is how it works, right? At least under the old act, now we have a new act. So
Yeah.
states are going to set up their own regulatory board, and they are going
Yes.
to have, yes, and they are going to have like different laws, right? So let's talk about what currently exists right now with
Okay.
NEC. So anything I'm talking about now is NEC, right? So let's talk
Okay.
about generation, right? Before you even break the ground, before you carry the first shovel to say you want to like build a generation plant, you must have gotten a license from NEC. So
Okay.
now what does NEC require from you, right?
Yes.
NEC requires that you have the capacity. So you have to show NEC a contract and an EPC contract with
Okay.
technical construction companies. Let's say you want to
Mm.
build a gas power plant. So you need an EPC contract from maybe a GE or a Siemens to say, okay, we have these people on ground already, right? To build this power plant. We have an EPC contract already, right? We have the land from the state government. We already have a land to build this power plant, right?
Okay.
So, and again, we have the funding, right? Though nobody's going to come and give you any money until NEC has given you permission and a PPA. But you can say
Yes.
yes,
Yes.
because you can
Definitely.
say we are already in talks with bankers and everything. We have the funding. We Once you give us this license, we'll be able to get the money out, right? And other like little things that NEC will require. But basically, you have to show you have the technical manpower, the technical capacity, the financial capacity, right, to build and complete the power plant and generate electricity. That's basically it. NEC is not. Once you have the money, you have the capacity. Once you can show that, NEC will give you your license on paper. What applies in the real world, yes, it's a very, very long
Understand.
process. Yeah, a very long
Nigeria.
process of following up and following up. But on paper, it's not, NEC doesn't require too much from you. I might be wrong because, it's been long I did the whole, I'm more of the technical construction and everything. So there might be other things, but from what I know, that is what NEC requires to give a license.
Fantastic, fantastic. Love it. I mean, from the operational side as well, funding, preparation, technical equipment, landed properties. So let's hear from you, Sandra. I mean, what are your thoughts?
Yes, Folabo has actually touched most of it. She's in the operation, so she knows what it is. But what I'm very sure of is that you must show financial capacity. So project financing comes in here. So you must have your bond. You must show your, financial bond. It's not like the bank has, or the financial company, or if it's you're getting a loan from a Frexim bank, some of these banks. It's not like they've given you the money yet, but you must show the bond from the
Mm,
bank that you can
yeah,
actually, you have the capacity to carry out the project and also the technical capacity. So Folabo has touched most of it. I totally agree with what she said
awesome,
on the
awesome, awesome.
requirement. Yeah.
So it looks like we're having a fantastic conversation here. It is a
Yes.
fantastic conversation. Okay.
Yes.
So let me check in on the questions again. I know we touched a whole lot, right? Uh, let me come back to you, Sandra. I mean, you were making a presentation, and I think at some point in time you didn't finish. So could you just touch on the remaining parts of your presentation, and then we'll round up.
Okay. Okay. So maybe okay. Let me see if I can still share my screen
Mm-hmm.
just to prompt me. Okay. Okay. So I was still talking about some of the incentives or some of the
Investment incentives.
pos- you said
I said investment incentives.
investment incentives or some of the positive provisions for renewable energy, providers. So there's this very important one. I think for Lambo also touched on it, the purchase obligation. So now MBET, that's the bulk purchaser, has an obligation, as well as the distribution companies. They have an obligation to purchase. They are mandated, in fact, by NEC to purchase a certain percentage of electricity from renewable energy, or they pay premium. Premium, the cost of premium is the cost of renewable energy that was not purchased. So that simply means that investors in the renewable energy space, it's Christmas for them, because they must the power they generate from renewable energy must be bought by MBET, or by the bulk purchaser, or by the discos, or by the state licensees. They just have to get a certain percentage of their power bought from renewable energy generators. So and the price for that power has to be cost reflective. Like I mentioned earlier, feed-in tariffs will actually apply here. It has to be cost reflective. So before, the distribution companies may not want to buy from the renewable energy generators at a certain amount. But now NEC has said that it has to be there will be regulations to provide the amount of that feed-in tariff, and those regulations are going to take into consideration the technical expertise, or the technical cost of coupling or assembling the renewable energy equipment, the cost of importing, and all that. Okay, we also have section 171. It also mandates the operator and transmission and distribution systems to connect generator of electricity from renewable energy source within the coverage area. Now, before, it was a problem. Discos never wanted, or they were reluctant to allow renewable energy generators to actually connect to the grid. They were reluctant because it's a network. Like for Labo said, it's a network. You can't just come to them and connect without getting their permission. So it was difficult to get that permission. But now, it's mandatory, like the act has made it mandatory, that they don't withhold consent unreasonably. And if the generators of renewable energy are to connect to the transmission or distribution network, then the distribution companies may come up with the excuse of, oh, the infrastructure is not good enough, or the infrastructure is not strong enough. We have a lot of grid collapse. They may come up with the excuse that, oh, the grid is not strong enough, it's not powerful enough. Now the act also goes further to mandate that the distribution and transmission systems operator make sure that they operate their system in a good way. That they have to make sure that the infrastructures are good. And when the infrastructure is not good, as if it cannot carry the capacity that will be connected from the renewable energy provider, then he has to bear, like, the cost of upgrading that facility, like the cost of upgrading the network to enable it to carry that capacity, has to be shared between the discos and the renewable energy provider. It has to be
Wow.
reasonably shared. Yes, so that's a very welcome. You get that provision, right?
Yeah, so I was just going to ask as a follow-up question.
Yes,
So now coming to investment, right? How does all of
yes.
this, attract investors into the space, right? I'm going to be asking for Labo, then I will come back to you as well.
Okay,
I
okay,
mean, so
okay.
now that we have these fantastic provisions and all of that,
Provision, yes,
so for
yes.
Labo, I mean, how does this in any way so how is this signaling to international organizations, international parties, investors, both locally and internationally, that look, Nigeria has a regulation that is touching on this and that. How does that encourage that investment into the sector?
All right. Thank you. So, um, Sandra has mentioned it. The first things first is that the act is basically telling the investors that if you bring in your money into the space, there's a
Yes.
guarantee under the act that you're going to get your money back. That's the feed-in tariff that Sandra has been talking about. It's there in the act, right? So the NEC has an obligation, right, to create to buy. Sorry, to create a tariff that's the amount you pay for electricity, right, for
Yeah.
renewable energy companies, and telling them basically that come in, tell us how much you used to make this energy that you're selling to us, right? We'll pay for the energy, and we also pay a premium for you. Like there's a profit. So it's not, you're
Then
not
like
just paying for the energy. And
so,
we're guaranteeing this for 20 years. That's what the act says. And there's a review period every 2 years. So
mm,
it's not a situation where you come in and you negotiate with NEC and say, okay, I'm going to be spending, pay 10 naira for every kilowatt hour of electricity. And the next thing, the next 2 years, our naira has, do you understand, dropped or risen, whatever, right? There's always a 2 year review period. So at
yeah,
least investors are sure of getting returns on investment once they sell their power, right? Then
interesting. So
apart from that, Sandra also mentioned there's an obligation for them to for the power that they generate to be put on the grid. So right now I'm talking of big investors. I'm talking of people that are generating 1 megawatt and above. I'm talking of the big companies, right? So once they are able to generate power through renewable, there's an obligation that that power is bought, right? So embed the grid is obligated to accept that power, right? Embed is obligated to buy that power at the feed-in tariff that has been agreed,
once it's
right?
renewable energy from a renewable energy source,
Yes,
is that what it
there's an obligation. The
is?
act There's an obligation from the act, right?
Okay.
But all this is great on paper, right? But as I said, from the operational side of right,
Yes, yes.
the truth of the matter is that this is a great signal for investors. But at the end of the day, our transmission infrastructure must be upgraded because right
True.
now, Sandra mentioned it when she started her presentation, generation capacity in Nigeria. So if all the generation plants in Nigeria should put all their power out at the very least 8,000 megawatts. But the transmission, that's the grid, has never at any point in time, right, accepted more than 5,000 megawatts of electricity. If the
So
grid
there's a
accepts
challenge
more,
with the transmission infrastructure.
there's a challenge with the infrastructure.
Yes.
So as the act is wonderful, right? The act is amazing. I actually love the act, right?
I may
But
ask, what is transmission infrastructure? What does it consist of? I mean, what
you
are the key
you know those,
elements?
please Sandra, please can I see your slides so I can show her? You know those
Okay.
gigantic transmission towers, really,
Yeah.
really big,
Let me
right?
share
Yes.
it.
So
Oh.
those, they are the ones that transport the electricity from the generation plants to
Let me see.
everywhere in Nigeria.
Okay.
Can you
So a lot
Please,
see?
of
Can you see
fantastic.
this, Lolade?
Okay. Yes, I
yes,
can. I get it now.
yes. So
So a
that is
lot of
called a transmission tower.
okay. So now we have to pump in money into building things like this, right?
Yes,
Yes. Yes.
yes. We
Okay.
do have to pump in money because right now all the generation companies cannot even put all their power, right? Like my
Yeah.
company, we have that is a big challenge. We have the capacity to generate at least 3,000 megawatts, right? And there's no point that we've been able to sell more than 1,000, up to 1,000 megawatts. I think the highest we sold at any given day, maybe 1,200 megawatts. And this is from the challenge from the transmission side, right? So we still have, generation is not a problem, right? Generation is not a problem at the moment. Transmission, distribution, you have to upgrade this infrastructure. Let's see what the states will do though. Like, let's see, now that the sector has been liberalized and everything, maybe states will start creating their own grid. Maybe they will start building, or they will give licenses, right, for private sector transmission companies to come and build
Good. This
transmission towers and
transmission.
substation. Yes,
Yes.
maybe. So let's see. But right now, if I were to advise like renewable energy companies, just come in, see how it goes, but understand the markets, understand what we are dealing with. That's for big renewable energy companies. Smaller renewable energy companies have a lot of opportunities,
There's
right?
a lot
So
of
there's
them. There's a
a
lot.
lot because off grid, mini grids, they have a lot of room to play, a lot of room as far as they're not generating more than 1 megawatt, as far as they don't have to deal with the grid, they are going to have a fantastic time with this act.
Wow, wow, wow. Fantastic. So much insightful conversations here. I'm so glad we are having this conversation. So final words from you guys, almost 4:30 just before we wrap up. Final words from Sandra. What would be your advice to the entire stakeholders in the energy space and also to renewable firms, both small and large?
Okay, my final words. It's a very good law. The Electricity Act 2023 is a very good law. In fact, it takes into cognizance the fact that we are in an energy transition era. That's a very good one. We're in energy transition era, and there are opportunities for green investment. A lot of opportunities for green investment. And my only problem is that the implementation policy one year after the commencement of the act. So I would have just loved the act to provide straightforward for the intents for the incentives. Let these operators know the incentives, but we're very hopeful that these incentives are going to, be introduced into the act, and I pray that there will be implementation of the act, because we've seen a lot of laws come up and that have not been implemented as we expected. So this law coming up now in 2023, the constitutional amendment, they are all good moves, but it will be greater if there is implementation, and implementation can start soon. Like Folabo talked about the VAT modification, tax incentives for importing equipment. That's a very good one. That's a very good one. I've actually heard of that. But I attended in Nigeria Energy Forum just sometime last week, and renewable energy investors were complaining that it seems that the customs officers at the airport are not aware. So how do you tell them that this law is on paper? They'll tell you, please, we know about, carry your law to one side, bring what we are charging you. So I really wish that the regulators, NEC, and other state regulators can maybe publish these regulations, publish these incentives in the airports or something. They have to create awareness, because the customs
Yeah.
officers are still charging renewable energy operators the amount that has actually been incentivized. So you ask yourself, are these laws just good on paper? We want them implemented. And also, that's my word to stakeholders. So my words to the renewable energy players: please come on board. Come on board, like Folabo said, especially the small players, even the big players. There's the opportunity for you now to cash in to get whatever you want. For the small players, you don't have to go through the stress of going to the grid. You can now operate mini grid in the estate. You can set up your own generating renewable energy generating company, and then generate energy for the estate. I believe that Nigerians will be ready to pay if they have the confidence that they will get this power. They are assured of this power, they will be willing to pay. And the purchase obligation made to the transmission companies and distribution companies is just a very welcome one, and it's a very wonderful one. And we also have a plan. I think the plan is contained is in the mini grid regulation, the 30-30-30 plan, that Nigeria should get at least 30% of its energy source from renewable energy by 2030,
2030.
by
Yes.
2030 or so, 2023 or 2030. So
2030.
if that 3030, if that 3030 plan is being implemented in this act, one of the policies that will be implemented in this act, it's going to be a very wonderful one. That's a lot of percentage from renewable energy. 30% is a lot from renewable energy. So there's no way a renewable energy investor will not cash in on this or will not get his return on investment. So it's a new dawn for renewable energy investment. I feel like even going into the business, if Folabo can teach me what it takes.
We'll be in touch with Folabos. Many of us are going so we will really be we need to really connect with Folabo so that
Really.
So it's been an amazing chat. Thank you so much. So final words from Folabo. Based on this new act, what do you think are the two important things we need to get right? As a country, as a country, and as an entire
Um,
system, as it were.
um, the act is a first step, right? Amazing act, as I said. Now, two important things for this act to work and for us to actually see the benefit of this act. Please, state governments have been given the power, right, to generate, transmit. Please, I wish I could kneel down and beg all the governors, right? Do not get involved in constructing this yourself. Call the private sector guys to do this. So we do not want a situation where it's a state government that is constructing a generation plant, right? If the private sector players are given the license, smooth licenses, a state government will just say, okay, GE, Siemens, come in, put a generation plant here. A 500, we are going to give you the land, we are going to give you the license, right? Transmission, come and build a transmission line, right? Just pay us tax, right? For this act to work, government
Mm,
has to start pulling their hands out of the infrastructural
mm,
development of the power sector. Stick to
fantastic.
regulation. Yes, that's one. Then secondly, for the renewable energy players, there are lots of opportunities. There are opportunities for training and also development partner. That's something I don't think we mentioned. The World Bank, Energy for All, USAID, Power Africa, they all have money, they all have funds on ground, right? To to to, to like give grants to the renewable energy companies. Like it's
That
there. The money is there. Just come in, right? Come in,
yeah.
train people. You are going to get funding, right? If you want to set up a training center for solar panel technicians, you are going to get funding as far as you know how to organize your books, like, and arrange, and you have like you're able to like connect with the players in the development space, right? There are loads of opportunity for small players, loads of opportunity, especially with this Electricity Act. We're going to see more development partners, more development organization bringing money because they are very interested in making sure that people have access to energy.
Fantastic, fantastic. So I hope that after this chat, we'll come up with some sort of white paper. Now that Folagwa is talking about opportunities, we need to write down these things. I need to come up. So like, I feel like after this conversation, we should come up with a white paper that talks about the opportunities for startups, opportunities
Yeah,
for investors,
yeah, that
and
would be great. Yeah,
the regulatory perspective. And it would be nice to do that with you guys. Once again, thank you so much for joining me. I hope you had
Thank
a
you,
nice time
Lolade.
as much as I did. Thank you very, very much. So we have finally come to the end of this particular roundtable event. And I want to say a big thank you to our speakers and a big thank you to those who are going to listen to this afterwards. Thank you so much. Um, it's a pleasure to have had you guys here. All right, so it's a wrap. Thank
Thank you,
you.
Ololade. Thank you,
thank you so
Folabo.
much
We'll
for having
connect on LinkedIn
me.
after this,
Yeah,
please.
yes,
Thank you.
please.
It's been a
Thank you
wonderful
so much.
conversation. Thank you,
Yes,
Ololade. Wonderful
I enjoyed
initiative
myself.
too. Enjoy
Yes.
your weekend. Thank
And
you.
you too. Bye.
Bye.